Welcome to Clean Titans, where we explore the groundbreaking innovations and inspiring leaders driving the clean energy revolution. Today, we have the immense pleasure of speaking with Nicola Teal, a true solutionist who has dedicated over 2 decades to finding nature based solutions to our planet's most pressing environmental challenges. Nicola is an environmental consultant, biophilic and inspirational speaker, an expert at the Design Council, and has worked in Ecuadorian Amazon. Her work spans from pioneer micro-remediation to empowering indigenous communities and advocating for biomimicry. Nicola, welcome to Clean Titans.
Thank you, Ali.
Nicola, your journey is incredibly inspiring. Could you take us back to the beginning and share what sparked your passion for environmentalism, especially your connection to the Amazon rainforest?
Yes, well, it kind of came when I was living in Australia and I met the great deep ecologist John Seed. And they were looking for somebody, some crazy person that would live for 6 months in the jungle without leaving. And to prove that the pink river dolphins lived in the lagoon, which the oil companies wanted to drill. So that was really how it started. I went down, I was filming the dolphins, and then I discovered, like most people don't know, that the amount of oil drilling that's happening in the Amazon rainforest. So that was really how it kind of started for me, seeing it, seeing rivers running black with oil and seeing the, threat to the indigenous people in the Amazon, so that Chevron Texaco could just keep pulling it out and carrying on. So yeah, that was really kind of how it started. And that's how I learnt of some of the threats down there.
You've spent over 20 years in the Ecuadorian Amazon. What are some of the most significant changes, both positive and negative, that you've witnessed there over that time?
Well, when I first started working there, it was really one man, one machete. People didn't have chainsaw access. Whereas now, of course, everyone can get hold of a chainsaw. So there's only so much forest you can cut down with a machete in a day. That's very different when you can get your hands on a chainsaw. So I've really noticed that. Also, the houses, when I first started working there, they were wood with a thatched roof. And now it's very difficult to see them because everybody wants concrete, breeze blocks, and a tin roof. That to them is the sign of development, even though they are so horrible to live in because obviously it rains hard and the roof, the tin makes it so noisy you can't even speak. The breeze blocks make it, unbearably hot. But that's really been development of changing, how they're living. And obviously, I've seen a lot of land clearance over the 20 years. What's been positive? Hmm. I don't know. That's a hard question. I can't say really that I've seen much, but I've seen more and more oil spills. I've seen more and more mining. We have protected forests now that are being opened for mining. And part of this is the tech. The world wants to have more AI and more tech, and so needs to have more copper and more gold and more minerals. And so that's now driving a huge boom in the mining industries in the Amazon as well. So I can't say I've seen anything get any better.
Yeah, it's sad. Those homes are just like hot boxes of heat, right? They're just attracting all that heat from accumulating, getting stuck inside the house. Your documentary, Blood of Amazon, highlights the challenges of the oil industry's impact. Could you elaborate on the long term consequences of this kind of environmental damage and how it affects local communities?
Mm. So when I made Blood of the Amazon, I traveled from the headwaters in Ecuador all the way down the river to Brazil to show the impacts on obviously the environment and the people that live there. I think most people are very shocked when they hear that the highest childhood leukemia in the world is the indigenous children in the Amazon. The 3 out of 4 people that die of cancer are women because women are, spend more time in the water, whether that's washing or collecting water. But these are the real impacts. And this is which I needed to show in the film, one of the largest environmental lawsuits, 30,000 indigenous people versus Chevron Texaco. And they've managed to do a very good job of keeping that very quiet. And even though they lost the suit and they were ordered to pay $3.5 billion, they just appealed and never cleaned it up. So we still have in the Ecuadorian Amazon almost 1,000 open toxic pits that were left behind by Texaco, now taken on by Chevron, and they've never been cleaned up. So every single pit has an overflow pipe, and each overflow pipe goes into the streams and the rivers. So that's the impact which has been going on the last 30 years. Nothing has changed. The pits are still there. The people are still sick and dying. Whole communities have been wiped out. In fact, a couple of indigenous nations totally have disappeared because of the contamination. So it's a huge issue. It hasn't changed, but as long as the world demands oil, so they will keep pulling it out from the last places on Earth.
Yes, and every barrel we burn, we need another one from somewhere more precious, right? You've worked with indigenous communities. What unique insights and wisdom have you gained from them regarding sustainable living and their relationship with nature?
Well, they are, to start with, it's not sustainable at all. They are thriving, they are flourishing. That's how people live when they can just live with the forest. But obviously now they can't just get fish from the rivers. They often need to buy tins of fish because the fish has been contaminated, the fish have disappeared. So the people are needing money, whether they're indigenous or not. And what I've learned for them are the importance of community resilience, community work days. So they regularly have a community work day. And you get a lot done when and everybody comes from the whole community. And one month it might be, fixing a bridge or fixing someone's roof, but then after the work, then they all feast together and have a drink together, and there's the social aspect. And I see how much that's missing from Western culture. There's very little kind of community get together. And so, there's a real strength which gives the real resilience to indigenous communities, that way of working together. And their cosmovision, that they do not see themselves separate from nature. Whereas for many white people, they see humans as somehow separate from the rest of the natural world. Whereas, of course, indigenous peoples just know that that's a ridiculous assumption. We are just another animal on this planet. And they know that. And they understand the interconnectivity of life like Westerners just don't. So there's so much to learn from them about respecting the world around, respecting your elders, having reverence to the natural world, this reciprocity, this giving back, not taking more than you need. These are all insights that we can gain from indigenous peoples that have thrived with the environment forever. And it's really this modern way that is just destroying that.
What was the turning point or a specific project that made you realize that nature based solutions were the key?
I don't know if there's a specific project really. I think that it's just, we have the greatest teacher all around us. And in whatever nature based solutions we're talking about, if we want to prevent flooding, we need to go upriver and see what's happening upriver. We need to learn from ecosystem, engineers like the beavers of like, okay, well, what happens? How do you prevent flooding downriver? Well, upriver, you create dams. Or so there's been many examples of nature-based solutions that I have seen that are working, but there's also many that are not. This absolute madness about tree planting. I don't see tree planting as the panacea. It's like, let's first protect the trees that we already have on the forest in the planet. I mean, this mountain behind me, it's like, that's not protected. You can buy, a hectare for $500 and cut it all down because we do not value standing forest. So, really, true nature based solutions are working with indigenous peoples who are the best ones at protecting the environment and ensuring that that is what we protect before we tree plant. And then, once this land is protected, then tree plant out from it and having a joined up approach rather than an idea of, well, we're just tree plant a million trees here and a million trees here, which are not connected to any ancient intact forests, means that they will never become biodiverse. They must be backed on to already established forests and allow them to get bigger. So I think these are the true solutions which I think are most relevant.
Let's delve into the core of your work, nature based solutions and biomimicry. For our audience who might be new to these concepts, could you explain them in simple terms and illustrate their potential with some compelling examples?
Well, I think I just gave an example of nature-based solutions with beavers. They're a great example. Like, what do beaver dams do? They slow the water down. They create an amazing amount of habitat. They purify the water. There's just so many benefits from such a simple thing as a beaver dam. And we can do that. We can learn from the beavers. We don't have to just release the beavers. So we learn from these nature-based solutions ourselves and we mimic that. So that's part of, learning from these systems. And biomimicry, my preferred definition, thanks to Janine Benyus, that really put biomimicry on the map, is that biomimicry is the conscious emulation of life's genius. It's mimicking, copying the natural world, understanding, really the forms, the functions, the processes of what makes a forest so resilient. How does it bounce back? How have the species that live there adapted and evolved? So, all of this we can learn from, this greatest mentor, which is, the world all around us.
You've mentioned that nature is the greatest research and development department. Could you expand on this idea and provide some specific examples of how biomimicry can lead to innovative solutions in areas like renewable energy, sustainable materials, or architecture?
So, in the natural world, materials are very expensive in that to actually manufacture and to make them, but design is cheap. So they have worked out that you want to use as least material as possible. So when we look, for instance, in London, there is a famous building, they call it the Gherkin, and it's this round building. And they wanted to make it so it didn't have to have a lot of internal pillars, but it needed to be structurally sound. So they actually learned from a deep sea sponge and the Venus flower basket sponge. This silica model only needs, the lattice work on it means that it's incredibly strong without having to be solid. So a lot less material is used. So the architects mimicked that. And so they were structurally using a lot less material, creating a really strong building. In renewable technology, we've known for a long time, how can we improve the efficiency of wind turbines, for instance? If we learn from whales, who, this great heavy creature that jumps out of the water through the wind, how does it actually use the air and cut through the air in a way that makes it most efficient? And when we look at the fins of a whale, they are not straight. So they've been able to show that actually, if wind turbines or propellers or blades of any kind actually had wavy edges, they would be much more efficient. Or even just changing the way wind turbines are, totally, like by learning from schooling fish. Right now, our typical three-bladed wind turbine has to be very far apart from another one. But by changing the structure, so using the way that fish school, wind turbines could be like placed a lot closer together using different kinds of technologies. So, whether it's looking at, how to, create more efficiency by, changing the design of the blades or actually looking at the kind of like the way that it's functioning. And another way, a great improvement to solar panels would be to learn from butterflies. Butterflies are the ultimate solar absorbers. And they don't just hang out in any way. They hold their wings at 17 degrees. And it's been discovered that holding the wings at 17 degrees means that the sun can come into the middle and bounce off and create more solar energy. So, what would that look like? The why are, butterflies' wings? They're made of hardly anything. And our clunky solar panels are so heavy. They've got so many minerals in them. They are not designed to be broken down. So we've got a long way to go to improve the renewables that we currently have. I mean, currently they are very inefficient. The mining of the materials that's needed and the disposal at the end of it is in no way closed cycle. So if we look at the rest of the natural world, there's only a certain amount of minerals that are actually used, and everything can be broken down. And right now, humans are using pretty much every element in the periodic table, and they cannot be broken down. So we can really start to look at materials, and whether that's a very strong shell, like an abalone shell, a power shell, which is can hardly be. Humans can't make a ceramic that strong, but we still have access to exactly the same minerals and elements. So that's really where we need to start looking at the design, but also the ingredients of what nature is using.
Micro-remediation is one of your pioneering projects. How can fungi be used to address pollution, and what are the broader implications of this technology for cleaning up our environment?
So fungi, they break down carbon in a forest. Otherwise it would all be twigs and wood that have broken and nothing was being broken down. They create an enzyme, and that enzyme washes into the soil and it breaks apart hydrogen and carbon. So petroleum is a hydrocarbon, and those enzymes from the fungi are able to break that down at a molecular level. So micro-remediation, the remediation of contaminated land and water, we've been able to show that it is an incredibly efficient way of remediating contaminated land. Like anything, there's got to be the finances behind it to be able to put these remediation techniques. Right now, it's a lot cheaper to throw a load of chemicals onto an oil spill and try and remediate it through chemicals. But all that does is just create more of a toxic soup rather than looking at remediation through phyto, myco, and bacterial remediation. So I think there's so much potential for, remediation using fungi.
How can the principles of biomimicry be applied to the design of a more resilient and sustainable infrastructure, especially in the context of climate change?
I mean, I think that it's so broad, biomimicry, and it covers everything from, like I was mentioning, the design of something, that the fact that in nature there is no such thing as waste. Waste does not exist. So everything is, in a kind of a circular, it's used again. How can humans learn from that to really design intelligently that waste is a design flaw? Somebody somewhere is designing that. So when we look from to these lessons of, how do we create no waste? How do we keep feeding the system? How do we collaborate? Nature is not about competition, it's about collaboration. And so, often people think of biomimicry just as the high tech solution, which of course it is too. But also there's social biomimicry where we can look at, how the rest of the natural world communicates. How does that function? There's incredible intelligence found in collective beings like ants and bees. So there's a lot we can learn on that level as well.
What are some of the biggest challenges in getting businesses and governments to adopt nature based solutions? And what strategies have you found to be most effective in overcoming these challenges?
Mm. I wish there was a great answer to that, but what stops it? Finances. Investment is not going the right way. Right now, trillions of dollars is going into artificial intelligence. And actually, money going towards nature-based solutions it's crumbs in comparison. So, ultimately, if we want to really move on, we need investment. And it's not like there's not enough money out there. There's plenty of money out there. It's just not being put into the right places. So there's so many great examples of, what can be done. And there are companies which will leave a legacy, like Patagonia, for instance. I mean, what Patagonia did, actually to give away their money and buy up vast, acres of land in Patagonia to protect it forever. There are companies like that which are leaving huge legacies. But there are also like some big companies now, like Boeing Aircraft or Dyson, that have biomimicry departments. Microsoft has had a biomimicry department. So there are many big businesses now that are understanding that if they really want to improve efficiency, they have to learn from nature. So it is, it's scratching the surface. But as far as policy change, that's the big one. And if only I knew, then I think we'd all be happy if we all knew how we could create change in policy. It's moving people out of the way, probably, that are stopping change happening.
You've emphasized the importance of learning from indigenous cultures. How can we effectively incorporate their traditional ecological knowledge into the modern sustainability practices? And what are the ethical considerations in doing so?
Well, I think that they need to be included on all decision making. And what happens we see at the COPs, for instance, often indigenous people are invited, but they're not given a voice. They're not at the table. So, it's urgent that we incorporate indigenous wisdom into all decision making. And because these people, they've lived with that land longer than anybody. They understand it in a much deeper level than, you know, most Westerners are very ungrounded from the land that they live. They've moved and they've moved and they've moved and they've moved and their ancestors have moved and they moved. They're not connected to any one place. They don't understand the land. But they also don't have any kind of cosmovision. So this kind of larger way of looking at the world can also really help, I think, with Western approach to, this idea of sustainability, which I actually really do not like the word sustainability, because do we want to sustain what we have? No. It's like we've sold ourselves too short. Do we want to have a sustainable future? No. We want the world to be flourishing, not to just to be sustainable. So I think we need to kind of like have a bigger vision than that. And I think that we've got a lot to learn from indigenous peoples.
In what way can the resilience of indigenous communities inform our strategies for adapting to climate change and building more sustainable societies?
I think that's, as I've just kind of like said, it's, how do they adapt? They do. They adapt, they move. They are not, like rigid as we have very rigid societies and rigid houses and rigid communities. We're not in a position to have any flexibility and to be able to move. So that's something which has always been, a part of indigenous society is that you move with the seasons, you move with the hunting, you move with the climate catastrophes, but their land is being taken away from them. So there's nowhere to move to. But we're going to see a lot of movement from climate chaos. We are worried about immigration. Well, there's going to be a lot more. People have to move. That's just what happens. We all need to move when the time comes. So having that that knowledge to be able to adapt, to be able to move, to be able to look at, where do we want people to be moving to? How can we create new, flourishing environments somewhere else away from the coast, away from low-lying waters?
How can we ensure that the application of nature based solutions and biomimicry respects indigenous rights and cultural heritage?
Yeah, I think by having them at the table, by ensuring that they have a voice, and that in this decision making process that indigenous peoples are consulted, and whether that's on the kind of like the rights of nature movement, or through any kind of conservation projects, because often sadly conservation can mean not including people. And we've seen that around the world with some very large conservation organizations, that they have actually, moved indigenous people off of their own land to protect nature without realizing that, of course, they are an integral part.
What are some successful examples of collaboration between scientists, engineers, and indigenous communities that have led to effective and sustainable solutions?
I'm sure there are some, but in my limited experience, I've seen very little. There are some scientists working now creating para-ecologists, local, you know, citizen science, training up local people how to identify plant species, animal species, to be able to map them, to be able to use GPS coordinates and map out their territory. So that way of being able to, protect their land, know what's there, protect vulnerable species. So in that way, that collaboration has been really important.
What role do you see for storytelling and education in bridging the gap between traditional knowledge and modern science?
Yes, I think people learn most from storytelling. Everybody loves stories, and it's one of the best ways to communicate. And that's something that again you find in a lot of indigenous communities, that they have their creation stories, they have lots of myths and legends, and storytelling is a huge part. And sadly, what the Western world now just has is a lot of fake news and fake stories, and people believe them. And that's the crazy, rather than actually knowing where the stories, came from and how they're passed down, they now just appear online, and with no backing, people will believe it. So, there's storytelling, there's myths, there's legends, there's falseness. And I think people have to be very, very careful what they believe and what they don't.
It's very sad. Many of our viewers are eager to contribute to the clean energy transition, but often feel overwhelmed. What practical advice do you have for individuals and businesses who want to make a tangible difference?
Well, I think that really important is local energy systems. So the more we can localize renewable energy, the better. So that would be definitely, within communities where, if possible, start up your own community-led energy systems. Um, Otherwise, it's not like everybody has to have their own solar panels on their roof, and many people can't afford that. But realistically, what we can do is see if we can change to a renewable energy provider. So people think often they're much more expensive, which is not always the truth. Sometimes they even work out cheaper. So really encouraging people to change their energy providers, to support the movement to renewable energy, to ensure that they are banking with banks that are not investing in fossil fuels, but instead they are investing in the future of renewables. So these ways of, rather than fighting against an old system, if we put our energy, our money behind what we want to see, that's how the world changes. But talking about it doesn't actually change it. We have to physically change the what we support ourselves. So, that's, a big part of it. I think the renewable energy, the money, the investment, all of this has to be a part of the future. And it needs everybody to just start, moving towards the future they want to see.
You talk about moving beyond sustainability to a thriving, flourishing future. What does that vision entail, and how can we collectively work towards achieving it?
Well, I think many people can't see the future. They don't have a vision of the future. And if you ask people, what does the future look like? It's quite apocalyptic. Hollywood has never given us a positive vision of the future. We have vampires and zombies, we have, climate apocalypse, we've got meteorites, but we don't have in our collective imagining a positive image of the future. What would that look like? If cities were green, if there were green roofs and green walls and, the inner city, had more food growing, that trees were actually fruit trees, that, how can we bring food into cities? Not only making it green is much better for our mental health, the quality of life. There's so many positives by actually looking at, greening cities and bringing food into our cities. So, that's one part where we can start imagining that, yes, where does our food come from? What does a transport system look like in the future? There are some great examples that are already happening through Europe of car-free towns. They have such good public transport system. Everyone gets around on public transport and bikes. There's no cars in the cities. There's children playing in the roads. So when we start to see that that world is possible, where communities are working together, the way that houses are built are totally different. Instead of having suburbs where everybody has to drive to and then feel isolated in their houses, instead redesigning the way that communities live together so that vehicles are on the outside, and instead you have people with gardens and outside with their children playing outside, but not when you're surrounded by roads that are too dangerous. We can't imagine what that can be. So, we have great tools like permaculture, like systems thinking, like donut economics. There's a lot out there already showing us that, another future is totally possible. And there are people that are living it and creating these changes. So I think the first thing is really to be able to, start to see that and look into these organizations like permaculture, or people that are just, just creating change. And just to remember also, permaculture is not just growing food. It's actually a design system. And that talks about, water, that talks about energy, that talks about, all sorts of different ways. And whether that's social or if that's physical, or of course, including food as well. But, all of those strands are part of a thriving future.
For businesses, what are some key steps they can take to integrate nature based solutions and biomimicry into their operations and business models? And what are the potential benefits?
Well, the potential benefits is they can save themselves money. So that's probably what they want to know. If you use less material, somewhere down the line, you end up saving money. So when you first look at what are the ingredients in your products and whatever that may be, whether that's, a house or a packet of cereal, you start to look at what the ingredients are and actually how you can, change that, how design would change that. So, the process of going through a design cycle with biomimicry, looking at scope 3 analysis to look at your whole supply chain. It's not just one business that can make a difference. They need to start communicating with their supply chain. Just like a forest communicates under the ground, so businesses need to communicate with their whole entire networks to make change. They need to empower their employees to come forward with positive solutions. There needs to be more, listening going on. If we learn from the geese that fly in a V formation, there's no one leader. The geese know it takes a lot of energy to be that leader. What happens if it was inbuilt? That the CEO stepped back and somebody else stepped into that position with new ideas and a fresh energy. So, if we learn from different ways of being, for businesses to have more than one person at its head is not efficient. To learn how they can use less materials, how they could ultimately create benefit to the world rather than doing less bad, that they could actually leave a positive impact.
What role does policy play in scaling up the adoption of nature based solutions? And what advice do you have for policymakers?
Oh, policy is huge and it stops so much and it's so slow and it's so cumbersome and it's so not agile. And, people in positions of policy, are holding keys to really be able to help us sort out so many of the issues that we're facing by changing policy, by understanding, what change can happen. So, yes, I mean, I just encourage anybody in those positions to just, actually find another way to become more agile, to move things on without having to overcomplicate and learn from natural systems on how do they communicate.
You co founded the Southeast Climate Alliance. What were the key factors that contributed to its success? And what lessons can be applied to other regions or communities?
Well, the reason was because there's a lot of little environmental groups around the world. And in the southeast of the UK, it's no different. There's a lot, every town has a little group of people that care. And they're actively doing things in their community to make it a better place. But those little groups don't seem to grow. There's a lot of people that say they care, but they don't take any action. And it's the same people that do everything. And I just thought, well, what if all those little groups came together in an alliance? They would feel much bigger than just their small group. So, I invited 12 different organizations to come to a meeting to see how we could work together. And that's grown to over 130 organizations now within under the umbrella of the Climate Alliance. And so all of those, and whether they are environmental groups, social groups, or faith-based organizations, anyone that's working on climate and ecological solutions can be in the alliance. And the idea is really for us to work with real practical solutions. So yeah, there's a great African proverb which says that one stick is easily broken, but not a bundle.
Looking ahead, what are you most excited about in the field of clean energy and nature based solutions? What are some of the most promising emerging technologies or approaches?
I'm excited by salt batteries. I think that we got a lot of sodium out there. We, can be really doing a lot more with desalination. And what do we do with all those minerals once we've actually desalinated it? So there seems like there's huge potential in that that's really not being recognized. Working a lot more with algae, whether that's for biofuel. It's been spoken about for a long time. We've been able to do it for a long time, but we're not. So, we've got this great ocean of power, of waves, of tides. We don't harness it at all. So, we do have these techniques, they're just not being scaled. So, but, the more I kind of like hear echoes and stories of that, a little tidal barrage has been made here, or there's some new wave power technique, or, it is coming through. And yeah, I mean, there are a lot of good ideas out there.
Yeah, it's like algae or and seaweed for fertilizer. That would be great, right?
Yeah.
How do you see nature-based solutions in biomimicry contribute to the broader clean energy transition beyond just specific applications?
Well, you know, for a clean energy transition, first of all, people need to understand they need to use less energy. We're not just going to flick a switch from fossil fuels to renewables and carry on using as much power. So I think there's a bit of a, for me, there's a worry in this idea that don't worry, everyone, just carry on as normal and we're all just going to go renewable. It's just not scaling up because every year we use way more power than the year before. And we're nowhere near in a position yet to meet that with renewables. So, we've got a long way to go to be able to get to that place. And I think they have to go side in side. And as we're opening more data centers, actually a data center itself needs to show that it can create its own energy on site and not take it from anywhere else. So when we can start to see that, and Microsoft did work with Janine on, for an example, on one of their data centers on a building and say, well, let's take this footprint of this piece of land and look at all the services that it provided in nature-based solutions before that building was put there. What actually did that piece of land do? And then be able to equate that with nature-based solutions. So, yeah, I think that there's real potential in looking, a lot deeper into just understanding a piece of land and the services that it provides and seeing how we can mimic that.
What are the biggest challenges that need to be overcome to fully realize the potential of nature-based solutions on a global scale?
Money.
Money drives everything.
Seems like it. And people that want to do it, people that just want to actually get their hands in the dirt. So, a lot of it doesn't, where I live in the UK, we've been doing a lot of voluntary work. People have learned how to put in hedges and lay hedges and create habitat and leaky dams like the beavers do and create meadows and create wetlands. And this has been done with volunteers. And I've witnessed with my own eyes how the landscape has been totally changing by groups of volunteers. But to do really large scale, which is what is needed right now, yes, we can do it on a small voluntary basis, which we absolutely must. We need a lot more people just getting out there and doing conservation work. I mean, the earth is calling for everybody to get their hands in the dirt and do something real. We are not going to save the planet. This concept of, signing petitions and talking about climate collapse without going out there and planting some wildflowers and actually slowing some water down and purifying some water and growing some more food. This has to be part of it.
Yes, and choosing green finance in your own financial world, right? That drives the money, as you
Totally.
said.
It's like if we're not investing, and those that have money to be able to invest are in a unique position to be able to drive all this forward.
What message of hope or call to action would you like to leave with our viewers, particularly those who are entering the clean energy sector?
Well, one of my favorite sayings is by Joan Baez, which was, "Action is the antidote to despair." And I think there's a lot in that we can all sit back and hope that somebody else will fix the problem, or we can start actually looking ourselves for the solutions. And they are all around us. We're firstly not asking the right questions, and we are still living in a siloed approach. This is a solar panel. This is a wind turbine. Why are they not integrated? Can that not be so that when we look at offshore, we build something which can harness the currents underwater, the tide, the structure is covered in PV and it's collecting wind at the same time, integrated using all methods of renewables, not in different, siloed approach. So, I think that those ways of looking towards different forms of collecting energy. I mean, we still don't really know how, trees even collect energy. I mean, we know the basis of photosynthesis, but there needs so much more study to understand, how the rest of the natural world's doing it. I mean, there are sea slugs on the bottom of the ocean that are able to photosynthesize, to make power out of what? So, we've got to find a way also to really look at the renewable sector becoming very aware of the waste that it produces. So we are in a situation right now where many solar panels that were put in 25 years ago are coming to the end. There is no way to recycle them. So it's urgent that as we build technology, we build the end of its life in. What's going to happen at the end of its life, and how can it be decommissioned, and how can it be recycled? So I think that's a really urgent issue for the renewable sector, is to look at the mining and the waste produced from the building of the structures, but also at the end of the day to ensure that it can be properly broken down.
But solar panels, even after 25 years when the warranty expires, they're still producing 70-80% of the energy. So
Yeah.
they can still be used for some other application than the original one that they were deployed for.
I recently was at a university, and one of the students there, she had come up with a great little idea for solar panels. She said in India, they only last about 15 years because of, the harshness. And so she said there's just defunct solar panels everywhere. And so she'd created like a little kind of like engineering gadget that could just turn solar panels into roofs. They can be clipped together, a really simple little structure, which meant that they could all be clipped and turned into greenhouses, turned into roofs for people that are living in shanty towns. And that would give it time for the industry to catch up and learn how they're going to recycle them. Because until there is a real way to recycle solar panels, there's a danger that they will end up in landfill, and they also have hazardous waste inside them. So, we really need to be looking at, how can we recycle the old solar, and how can we actually use some of that in the future technologies, but mainly looking at, ensuring that it is a true closed loop system and that it can be recycled again in the future.
I'm trying to get a couple of CEOs of solar panel recycling companies to come. There are some people who are claiming they can recycle almost 100% of the material. So let's see what they have to say.
Oh, let's hope so.
Where do you see the most promising areas for innovation and investment in this space?
Oh dear gosh, there's just so many areas that need innovation, whether that's transport. I mean, it just appears like people are not going to stop flying. You know, this is a major issue. So little is going into this huge problem we have with, the 1% flying a lot. And, where are most emissions coming from? The 1%. The more money you have, the more you emit. So if we're going to work in order of priority, then surely it's, making sure that all these super yachts and supercars and super jets are actually, evolving. So that's where, a lot of this is coming from factory. How are we going to turn factories around to be able to be, actually net positive? How can we, move past this just idea of net zero? We don't want to just get to zero. We want to get to net positive. So shifting the goalposts a bit more.
Nicola, you've had an extraordinary career. What have been some of the most challenging moments you've faced, and what key lessons have you learned along the way?
I mean, I'm very lucky in that I don't really see life as a black and white. I see a challenge, but for me, I look at it, well, a problem solution. I don't know if I can really say that I've had any one major challenge that has really affected me. I've just seen them as learning experiences and gone, well, okay, whatever that is, like a river, there's always going to be boulders in it, and you have to find a way to just go around them and carry on. So I think that's the way, really, is to learn from the river and to just keep moving in the right direction.
What motivates you to keep going in the face of environmental challenges, and what gives you hope for the future?
Well, what motivates me is my absolute deep love and awe of the natural world. I see the beauty all around me. And that is what motivates me to do what I do, to prevent losing that which I've been lucky enough in my life to see. Many people that live in a city, even though they could just get on a bus and get out of the city and go, yeah, people often don't. So, really, you only protect that which you love. And if you don't really love the natural world, well, why would you be interested in protecting it? You know, people love to go on holiday and see a beautiful sunset and but to really deeply observe the rest of the living world and to see the absolute beauty in every species, then it drives you to want to protect them.
If you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Just keep on doing what you're doing. Yeah, it might not all go to plan, but hey, as long as you can, on your deathbed, think, I tried my best. I did what I could. Then you know that you can, feel good about your life.
How has your perspective on environmentalism and solution finding evolved over the past 2 decades?
I seem to have lost belief in protest. I think that I would rather see people just getting out and getting their hands dirty than, going in the streets. I think there can be different forms of revolution, and the protest movement has always been important to raise awareness. How else do you get in the media? How else do you actually tell a story? So it's had that place. And, when I was younger, I was, always there on the picket line. I've made hundreds of banners and posters. But now I just feel like I would rather just be physically doing the work.
What role does creativity and storytelling play in communicating complex environmental issues and inspiring action?
Yeah, we are definitely needing all artists, musicians, poets, storytellers to show us another future is possible. And, that's where we need it. We need the arts and the creatives to help us to have an image of the future. Because if we can't see it, we're never going to get there.
Yes, I interviewed a sci-fi author with a positive view of the future.
Great. Who's that then? I'd be interested to learn more about.
You can go back and look at some of our older videos, and I'll send you the link. Nicola, this has been an incredibly insightful and inspiring conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience with us today.
Thank you, Ali. Yes.
To our viewers, thank you for joining us on Clean Tightness. We hope this interview has empowered you to become part of the change. Please subscribe to our channel to stay updated on the latest innovations and inspiring stories in the clean energy revolution. Please tell your friends about us and ask questions in the comments.